everyone, I'm Rebecca and welcome back to my sewing room. It is the start of a new year, 2026, and I have a feeling that there are a lot of you who are making some New Year's resolutions, including, hopefully, learning to sew if you don't already know how, or maybe even improving your sewing skills if you are just beginning. And today's project is a perfect starter project. As soon as you learn how to turn on your machine and sew a straight line, you can make this project. So this is a really fantastic one for beginners. We are going to be making an elastic waist skirt. In my opinion, it is the best project to start with if you are interested in garment sewing because it's so simple. It's all just straight lines. So specifically today, we are going to be making an elastic waisted skirt for my mom. This is her Christmas present because I'm recording this before Christmas, and she loves Winnie the Pooh. If you have been around my channel before, you might remember that last summer, I found a whole bunch of these curtain panels at the thrift store. So this is also an upcycling project. And I made myself a dress out of them. Looks like this. That dress is a little bit more complicated, but my mom isn't really a dress person, but she's starting to get into skirts. So she is also a humongous Winnie the Pooh fan, so I am making her a skirt. The thrift store is a really great resource for fabric because you can use sheets, curtain panels, tablecloths, you can upcycle from existing garments, and of course everything is really low cost. And especially without Joann's around anymore, I would say that if you are just starting out, go to the thrift store, get yourself fabric at the thrift store, look in the home linen section and pick up some fabrics, some sheets, some curtains, etc., and make yourself something, because then you won't have a lot of monetary investment in it either, and it will be a really good way for you to practice, but also those fabrics can be really good. Try to look for cotton if you can, especially I've noticed IKEA sheets showing up at the thrift store. That is a great resource because those things are usually cotton. Just check the tag. And this one is actually a cotton poly blend, and this is from the 90s, which I love because it totally brings me back nostalgia wise. And also this has kind of a window pane plaid pattern on it. Now plaids can be more complicated if you are making something more complicated than this skirt. However, for this type of project, it can actually be a little bit easier because you have guidelines for where to cut. This isn't really the straightest plaid, so it doesn't quite work as well as a guideline as your typical plaid. But if you find yourself a plaid Christmas tablecloth, something like that, that is a great thing to start with because it gives you guidelines on what's the vertical, what's the horizontal. Stripes kind of work the same way, but plaid gives you both directions. So definitely go through the thrift store and see what you can find. Now, this is the elastic that I'm going to be using. I found this on Amazon and I will link it down below. And my mom has actually already gone through and cut this to her waist measurement. And she likes her skirts to fit a little bit looser. If I were to make this for myself, I would kind of stretch this out a little bit and then cut to my waist measurement so that it would hug me a little bit tighter around the waist. She did this so it would be a slightly looser fit at her waist. It's totally up to you how you want to do that. But if you're going to do an elastic waisted skirt, what I would recommend is just take your elastic, put it around your waist, hold it to where you feel like it's comfortable, and it doesn't have to be at your waist. If you like your skirts to sit a little lower or higher, you can do that as well. I like mine at my natural waist, but hold it to where you think it's comfortable and kind of pinch it right here on the side and mark where that edge is and cut off the excess. You just need 1 inch for the overlap where you're going to do the seam. That's called seam allowance. Every time you sew anything, you should have about a 1/2 inch extra that goes into your seam called seam allowance. I'll show you as we do the sewing. Now, I've already tested this elastic to see what it stretches like, because when you're making an elastic waisted skirt, what you want to do is hold this up to a ruler. I would say mark out about 10 inches. That's what I've done over here with this pin. This is a 10-inch section, and you want to hold that up to a ruler and see how far it stretches. In this case, it is to 15 inches, which means that this skirt is going to have a 1.5 to 1 ratio. And the elastic is going to do all of the gathering for us, which is really pretty nice. So the next thing that you need to do, once you have found your waist measurement and cut off your excess elastic, you are going to do a little bit of math here. I know. With your elastic, once you've found what your ratio is, again, minus 1.5, you are going to multiply your waist measurement by 1.5 or by whatever your ratio is. And that is how you are going to get how much fabric you actually want as a panel for this project. So in my case, I need 73.75 inches across. I have not yet cut off the excess. This is about like 88 inches across. So I'm going to use one of these kind of vertical stripes of the plaid, and I'm going to hopefully just be able to cut right along down that stripe where I can get my 73.75 inches of length total in my flat panel. This is what I call a flat panel skirt, meaning that it is the same width of a panel at your waist as it is at the hem. As you learn to sew a little bit more and you go on with your projects, you can try all sorts of different skirts. You can do ones that are circle skirts. Those are a lot harder, so give yourself a little bit of time before you do a circle skirt. You can do ones out of shaped panels so that it's narrower at the top than it is at the bottom. Those are nice and easy and are also nice and flattering, and it's easy to put pockets in them too. To be honest, I forgot to ask my mom if she wants pockets, so I may complicate this skirt a little bit because I'm going to check in with her to see if she wants pockets. It will complicate this just slightly, and I will show you how to do the pockets. You absolutely do not have to do them, and I would recommend that if you are making your very first project, skip the pockets. If you've done a few of these now, start to add pockets in because it does complicate it just a little bit. It's not too hard, but there's a couple more steps. Okay, as I expected, she does want pockets because what self-respecting person doesn't want pockets, right? So I'm going to show you how to do this if you are not going to do pockets, and then also how to do this with pockets. Again, it adds just a couple of steps, but it's worth it. So as I mentioned, the very first step, other than the fact that I've now already cut out these pockets, which by the way, for pockets, I just use a pocket pattern. Really, any skirt pattern out there has one. And I take these out of my skirt patterns and then like pin them to my bulletin board, which is why they look so rough. And then I make them bigger because these pocket patterns don't take into account the fact that you're gonna have a smartphone in your pocket. So my pocket is a little bit larger than these pockets. You just scoop this out a little lower. You could even pop your phone on as you're cutting it out just to make sure your phone has room. And like if you want to put other things in there too, you know, make them even bigger. You can make pockets whatever size you want, but they are this shape for inseam pockets. I know it looks pretty funny. That is an inseam pocket shape. Now that those are cut out though, I am going to cut my fabric to the right size. And the difference here between pockets versus no pockets is if you are doing this with no pockets, you don't need to cut anything other than one big rectangle. So you are going to cut that ratio waistline, like 1.5 to 1 waistline, like my 73.75 inches, and you are going to cut whatever length you want. Now keep in mind when you are looking at what length of a skirt that you want, drop your measuring tape down, like hold it at your waist. Look in a mirror so you're not bending down. Look and see where you want the bottom of that tape to be. Or measure a skirt that's already in your closet if you like that length. Personally, I like about a 31 to 32 inch length, and that's what my mom wants as well. She wants 32 inches. We're both tall. I'm 5'10", she's 6 foot, so you might not want that long. For us, that's a mid-calf length. Now on top of that length measurement that you've used the measuring tape for, you are going to add 1.5 inches. 0.5 of that is that seam allowance. Remember we talked about that earlier, the excess that is going to go into the waistband in this case. And 1 inch of that is going to be your hem. So you could do a deeper hem if you want. I recommend a 1 inch hem for when you're getting started. It's nice and easy to do. So add that extra length. So for me, that is 33.5 inches. That is going to be the length of my skirt. And then 73.75 inches, that's going to be the width. But if you are adding pockets, add 1 more inch to the width because we also are going to actually have to cut this in 2 pieces instead of 1 because you want a pocket on each side. So you're going to need to have 2 seams instead of 1 seam. So if you are not doing pockets, once you have cut this out, then you are golden and good to go, and we can move on to just sewing up the back seam and adding the elastic. To sew the back seam, all you're going to do is to flip this right sides together. So the right side is the side that you wear on the outside, and you are going to flip this around, right sides together, and you are going to pin along this long seam. This is the vertical seam of the skirt. It's the only seam that you're going to have to make in this main skirt panel. You are going to pin along this seam. I recommend putting your pins in horizontally, so perpendicular to this edge, but it's personal preference. You could also put them parallel with the pin head going lower. So that way, as it feeds into the machine, you can easily pull that pin head out. You are not supposed to sew over your pins, just keep that in mind. But I do prefer to pull them out from the side. So that's why I like to stick them in perpendicularly. Once you have pinned this long side, we are going to sew this long side with a 1/2 inch seam allowance. And I'll show you what that looks like on a Brother sewing machine. It might look different from one machine to the next, but let's take a look at what the Brother machine setup looks like for a 1/2 inch seam allowance. Okay, my machine is really fancy, so just kind of ignore the features of this machine, but we are going to look at the foot and at the stitch setup. So for my machine, when we look at the stitch setup, we can choose if we want the stitch aligned with the left-hand side or the center. And I am going to choose to align mine with the left-hand side. You'll notice on mine, it shows on the screen that it's moved over. I also personally prefer to use a longer stitch length. I like a 3mm length, but that is personal preference. Now over here, what we have is the standard foot on a Brother machine. And this foot, the distance between where the needle is right now and the side of the foot is a 1/2 inch. So when we're sewing, we can actually just line our fabric up with the side of the foot. Make sure it doesn't go anywhere past that. We're going to line it up with the side of the foot, and we are going to get a 1/2 inch seam allowance right there. And so if you are just doing no pockets, you can go ahead and sew that seam now and meet back up with us at this timestamp right here. For those of us who are adding pockets, we have a couple of more steps. So you are going to take your fabric panel, doesn't really matter which direction, right sides out or insides out, but you're going to take it and you are going to fold it in half. And then what I recommend doing is taking your iron and pressing that fold in. So right here, I've got a nice little crease pressed into the edge, and what that's going to do is it's going to give me a nice little guideline for cutting my other seam. So I don't know if it's showing up on camera. I think you can see that fold right there. I am now going to take that fold and I am going to cut all along it, and that is going to become my second panel so that I have 2 places to put pockets, one on either side. Now I am going to take an extra step that I do not expect first-time sewers to do, but this is an option. Before you go to sew all of this, if you want to encase your seams, you can. On a lot of standard sewing machines, you have a stitch called an overcast stitch. On a Brother machine, I've noticed, like with my students' machines, tends to be kind of stitches 6, 7. Oh, I didn't mean to do that. Oh no, look at me. I'm turning into a child here apparently. But it does tend to be around stitches 6 or 7 on your menu for kind of the standard entry model Brothers. And you're going to know which stitch it is because it's probably going to tell you on the machine that you need a G foot. The G foot is your overcasting foot. And you are going to overcast, which means kind of stitch around the edges of your fabric. And what that's going to do is it's going to encase your seams so that you don't have any fray. There are other options for encasing your seams. You can do French seams. There's a few other things. That's not for beginners, honestly. And even the G stitch, doing that extra step, you don't have to worry about that if this is your very first sewing project ever. I certainly did not do that on my first sewing projects. In fact, it probably took me at least a year of sewing before I learned that you were supposed to overcast things. On the other hand, if you have a serger, which as a beginner sewer, I assume you don't, but a serger is an entirely different machine. And if you look at your knitwear and see on the inside of knitwear where you have like a lot of stitches going over the edges of everything, that was done with a serger. And a serger is a really great way to make all of your edges nice and clean. So personally, that's what I'm going to do for this project. Again, as a beginner, you don't have to do that, but I am going to go through once I cut these into 2 pieces, and I'm going to overcast all of the edges, and I will show you what that looks like when it is complete. This is what a serger looks like, by the way. Again, I don't expect any beginner sewers to have this or even really need this, but you can see it works with multiple cones of thread at the same time. You can actually go up to 4 threads, and it is going to create a nice finished edge on my fabric, which I will show you in just a second. This is what the serger looks like in action, by the way. If you are looking for a good starter serger, I do recommend this one right here. This is the Brother 1034D. I'll leave a link to it down in the description. It does almost the exact same thing, except it's a little bit harder to thread. It doesn't have as good of a rolled hem, but you don't need that if you're just starting out. And this type of serger is a lot more expensive, so I definitely recommend this one as your first serger. And this is what serging looks like once it is done. So you'll probably recognize this from the inside of your manufactured clothing, but it has a nice, neat way to finish all of those edges. So next up, you are going to add the pocket bag pieces to the skirt itself. And how that works is that you are going to take the right side of the skirt fabric up with, really it would be the right side of the pocket, but this is the same either side. This is just a white poly cotton broadcloth. And this is going to get aligned with the side. You are going to pin in place right along here, and then you are going to sew this seam with a 3/8 inch seam allowance. So when we were looking at the machine before, that means center your needle and use the edge of the foot. So this is what it looks like with the 3/8 inch seam allowance sewn. You can see my perpendicular pins here. And what you're going to do is you're going to open that up and press this from this side here, going outwards like that. So it winds up looking like this right here. You can see the seam allowance actually through the pocket, but this is going to be nice and flat over here, because now what's going to happen once we've pressed all of these, which by the way, there is a pocket bag on all of the sides. So there's 2 per piece. You can see the other one right here with the fabric crumpled up in between. There's one on either side, and then there's one on either side of the back as well. And what's going to happen here is that we are going to take the back side of the fabric, and we are going to, once we've pressed everything, line this up like this on top of itself over here, and we are going to sew all the way along the outside here and all the way down the side with a 1/2 inch seam allowance all the way. As you can see, I have now pinned this area in place, but that's not all that you're going to sew. You are also going to sew up just a little bit here and down just a little bit here. So from the top up here, you're going to sew down about 3/4 of an inch, pretty much to where this pin is, maybe just past where the pin is. And that is going to kind of stabilize the top opening of the pocket. And then over here, you are going to sew up to where I have marked this line right here, which is like about 1 3/4 inches, 2 inches. You can just eyeball that from where the kind of the bottom part of this pocket connects. And this is going to be basically the bottom of the pocket opening to stabilize that. So in between, you are going to be able to access your pocket, but you don't need this entire width to be able to access the pocket. You want a little depth to the pocket, and that is why we put this bit in right here. So this is what it looks like now that it has been stitched. Hopefully you can see my white on white stitching all along here, but it's going all the way around and then back up to this little pink line and then down again. So now we have to press this, which means you have to determine which one's your front, which one's your back, if you have not yet done so, because this upper pocket section is going to be pressed towards the front so that when you put your hands in the pockets, they're where they're supposed to be. When you go to press your pockets, you are going to want to do so from the outside here. So this is the pocket slit right here, and I am just going to give that a nice quick press. And then we will press the whole rest of the seam, but for that, we are going to do it from the inside. So whether you are doing 1 seam with no pockets or 2 seams with pockets, you are going to press open that seam. That means you're going to kind of put your finger in between the 2 here, give it a little bit of a finger press just to start yourself off, and then take your iron and press. And that's really hard to do while I'm filming with one hand. You're just going to press it with a little bit of steam all the way up. For those of you who did do pockets, you're going to do it until you reach the bottom of the pocket. For those of you who didn't do pockets, you're just going to press that all the way up to the top. So once your seams are pressed, you are going to want to turn your attention to the elastic. And the very first thing that we're going to do with the elastic is actually to light it on fire. Well, we're going to melt the edges of the elastic because this elastic does fray a little bit, but it's all like meltable materials, which means that we can actually melt it so that it will not fray. So just very carefully, run a little flame right along the edge, and that melts the edge of your elastic. Once you've done that to both ends, then you can take both ends together. Make sure you don't have any twist in your elastic, and you are going to pin that in place, and you're going to stitch right across there with a 1/2 inch seam allowance. If you have a triple stitch, which is this one right here, I do recommend that you use that for the elastic. It's going to make things go back and forth as you're stitching them. I know it doesn't look like much here, but that is what the triple stitch looks like. You can also, as a next step, fold this out and do a stitch along the edges here. It just creates kind of a nicer line. You can do that with a zigzag or with a triple stitch. Honestly, you can probably even do that with a straight stitch because this elastic really doesn't stretch much top to bottom, and that's why we don't use a straight stitch on elastic generally, is because if you stretch a straight stitch, it will pop. Before you actually attach the skirt to the waistband, I find that it's easier to do the hem. So we are going to fold our fabric up by 1/2 inch all the way around the bottom and press that in place. Once that is pressed, you are going to fold it again and press that in place and pin that in place as well, because that's where we're going to stitch it. Once your hem is all pinned in place, you are going to stitch right along this edge so that it's just before falling off the edge, and that'll give you a nice clean line on the outside. If you really don't want to see it on the outside though, you could also do this by hand, but for most modern day clothing, we do see stitch lines on the outside. So once it is stitched, this is what it looks like from the inside, and this is what it looks like from the outside. Now we can go ahead and attach the skirt portion to the waistband. The next step is to divide both your waistband and the top of your skirt into segments. I like to do mine into 1/8, so you're basically just going to fold this a bunch of times, find the halfway, find the halfway again, and find the halfways again. And with each of those, mark that with a pin. You're then going to do the same thing to the top of the skirt over here. Again, marking either with a pin or on here, since it's fabric, you could use like a friction pen or fabric marker. And then you are going to match up each of those markings to the waistband and pin those in place. So there should be 8 places all around the waist that are pinned in place, ready to be sewn. This is what the waistband looks like when it is pinned in place at those 8 points. This is right sides together, by the way. I don't think I mentioned that, but the right side of the fabric. The elastic has a right side only because you have done the seam, and that seam should ideally be placed in the center back of the skirt. For those of you who did one seam, I would line up the seam of the skirt with the seam of the elastic for one nice continuous seam up the center back. Now what's going to happen is I'm going to sew this in place with a 1/2 inch seam allowance, and I'm going to stretch out the elastic as I go, and that way the fabric will wind up being flush against the elastic. Now in hindsight, honestly, I think a slightly stretchier elastic would work better for this because I feel like this skirt doesn't have a lot of volume, and generally speaking, I would say you want a skirt with more volume. Of course, that's all personal preference. You might like a skirt with less volume, but I think I like more of like a 2-to-1 or even a 3-to-1 ratio as opposed to a 1.5-to-1. So as you go, you're going to have the fabric underneath the elastic here, and you are just going to pull that elastic straight. You can see the fabric coming up taut against the elastic. If you wish, you can pin that in more places, but I just use one hand up here, pulling this. You're not really pulling, you're just making sure that the weight is not being pushed against the needle like you're pulling forward, and then you're going to pull with this hand straight, and that is what's going to create that tautness as you sew it through them with the machine. This is okay to do with a straight stitch because you are already stretching the elastic out. As you get to the pockets are also going to be incorporated. Obviously, this is not something that becomes flush against anything because it already is flat. once you have sewn the full seam, give it a really gentle press right here from the outside, just kind of pressing down so that those gathers lay really nicely on the elastic. And that is it. There's our skirt. So super, super simple project. Even with the addition of the pockets, it's really not too bad. But again, if you are doing this for the very first sewing project ever, I recommend doing it without the pockets. Just give it a go. And then on your second time, maybe go ahead and take one step further and add the pockets in. And of course, you can do lots of different skirts. You can graduate from elastic waistbands to fitted waistbands. That adds another layer, especially if you add a zipper in there. I do actually have several videos on here about kind of beginner sewing projects, so I'm pretty sure I have them all in a playlist. If I don't, I'll put them in a playlist for you, and I will link that playlist down below in the description so that you can go check that out and see what other beginner sewing projects you might want to try right after you do this type of skirt. But again, this is one of the easiest ones that you can do. It is a great first project. So I wish you all so much luck on your sewing adventures. Leave me a comment down below about what you are excited to sew, whether it's this skirt, whether maybe you are a more advanced sewer and you are making something else. Let me know what all you are sewing. But that's going to be it for this video. If you like this video, please go ahead and click the thumbs up icon. And if you'd like to see more videos like this from me, or videos about the sort of things that I like to sew, like costuming and cosplay, please go ahead and click subscribe and a little bell icon to be notified every time I post a new video. I do post videos here on YouTube at least once a week, usually with sewing vlogs, kind of like this, out on Tuesdays, and sometimes with additional costuming or sewing related content, especially shorts, out on Saturdays. But I post every day over on my Instagram, so please go follow me on Instagram. That's at Lady Rebecca Fashions. And if you'd like to help support all of the work that I do on this channel, I do have a link to my Patreon and my Ko-fi down in the description below, or you can send me a super thanks or join my YouTube channel memberships right here on YouTube below the video. I'd also like to give a special shout out to my Edwardian level patrons, Jean and Kim. Thank you all so much for joining me today. I hope you all have a wonderful week, and I will see you very soon in my next video. Happy sewing!